Welcome back to Ned Conger on YouTube. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some memories I have of George Herbert Walker Bush. When I first heard that he had died, I was almost glued to the television the whole time from then until he was buried. And it was an emotional thing for me because I had known him since 1971. The moment that they took his casket out of the hearse at the cathedral, it brought tears to my eyes, and that happened again to me at the service for him, the last few words of his son. We met in 1971 when he was ambassador to the UN, and I happened to be on the staff of the commandant of the 3rd Naval District, headquartered in New York City. At that time it was Rear Admiral Francis Foley. And I was placed in charge of the Navy's participation in Armed Forces Day. And I was aboard one of the ships that we had brought in. And the ambassador and his wife came aboard. And we had a very pleasant hour conversation. I think the last half hour, Barbara was sort of itching to get home. But George and I really had a lot in common, and he wanted to talk to me. I think he was missing his days in the Navy. I hadn't realized that he'd been in the Navy, but as we talked, I told him that I had come in as an ensign, of course, and I was on a staff of several different admirals, and I really enjoyed that learning experience. I was taught basically by admirals like Bat Cruz, Swede Ekstrom, Dan Smith, called Dog Smith, and Barty Bardshar. They all took a big interest in bringing this ensign and later Lieutenant J.G. Up to speed. Most of them, I think, were Naval Academy graduates, and they wanted to bring me up to their speed, so they put me through the ropes with that. And it was interesting in this conversation. I told him that I had spent quite a bit of time flying from the aircraft carriers on Yankee Station into Vietnam with messages, and in those days we didn't have the kind of communications that we had here, so highly secret things had to be delivered by hand. When I mentioned to him that I was not an aviator, I was an intelligence officer, but I'd flown aboard carriers and off them, but my first carrier landing was in a TBM, and when I said that, he said, well, that's the plane I flew in World War II. But to show you how modest he was, he never mentioned the 58 combat missions that he'd flown, or being shot down near Japan, or being rescued by a sub. I learned about that much later. But he was very interested that I had just come from 4 years of operating off of Vietnam and going in and out quite often. And one aspect of it was, at one point when I was on the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier, there was a decision made that President Tu and Vice President Key would fly out to the carrier and present medals to a group of about 10 aviators who had done heroic missions. I was sent in to coordinate that, and Vice President Key, who was an aviator himself, wanted to fly aboard in an F-4 because he wanted to be more macho. Tu wasn't an aviator and didn't like that, almost turned it down, but I convinced him that he could also fly aboard in an A-6. So both of them flew in as a partner to a real pilot. Another little incident that goes with this, I had to promise Mike Wallace, who was with CBS, I think, at the time. He said, I won't go out and cover this unless you can assure me that I get an interview. And I said, you won't be able to get an interview. And but he came anyway. But once we got on board, the Admiral overruled me, and he did get an interview, even though President Tu wasn't too happy about it. But getting back to George Bush, while he was at the UN, I received a medal. It was in Vietnamese, and I sent it over to him since we'd gotten to be pretty good friends. And I asked him maybe he could probably find someone from Vietnam there who would translate it for me, which he did. And it came back to me. They were presenting me this medal because I personally killed, I won't tell you how many thousand North Vietnamese, but they gave me credit since I'd been targeting them. When later, after he was no longer ambassador or no longer president, I saw that his son, who was president, was considering attacking Iraq. And I thought that was a stupid thing that would really result in problems for us. And I wrote to his dad saying, please convince your son not to invade Iraq. He wrote me back a nice letter, but it said, you must write to him yourself because I never give my sons advice. I think I'll probably end up giving that letter to his library. I think that George Bush is probably going to be thought of as the most representative of the greatest generation. His impact on ending the Cold War and unifying Germany and many other international affairs were tremendous contributions, and I think the historians in the future are going to consider him one of the greatest presidents. Thank you.